Good. Okay, time being 5 o'clock, quorum of members present, I'm going to call the Solar Array Task Force to order. We will start with agenda item number 1, approval of the minutes from the June 21st meeting. Any changes or comments there?
I'll move to approve.
Okay. Motion to approve from John, seconded by Jay. Any other comments? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, no opposed, it passes. All right, we'll move on to item number 2, discussion of possible action on the communication plan and timeline. So I asked John to help us get a rough draft together of kind of the next 9 months, 8 months now, of what this task force can do. And I guess I'll open up to John. You want to start? Any comments or?
Sure. Eric and I had a chance to meet and go over this, and it's at a very high level in a concept plan, but I think that the neighborhood and the community have a right to know sort of what process we might use, and again, this is up for discussion, but I thought it was important that as we look at it, and I modeled this after what's known as the remedial investigation feasibility study side of the Superfund environmental cleanup program, which I'm familiar with, having done that for years. And so you start out by collecting your background information, which we've already begun. The overview of solar power, what are environmental factors, what's the size, noise, appearance, how effective are the systems, what's the life cycle, things that we've talked about, what funding is available with the Inflation Reduction Act and other things, and how much energy could be generated with the array and, on an acre side. And then get into the evaluation of what the current utility utilization needs are in terms of kilowatt hours, and could the needs be met partially or totally with solar energy, at what cost, and what is the impact on the ratepayer and savings that could be realized, if any, by the utility, and what size would the system need to be. At the end of compiling that information, we could then, the proposal would be to take that background information out to the community and present it sort of on the concept, here's what it is, here's what the problem is. From then, you would then go into developing conceptual options. Where would how big would the solar array be? Where would it be configured? Where would it be located? What would the design be? Talk about setbacks in berming, and then evaluate, get all of the options out there. But I think before you finalize the options, you would then take that out for a public hearing and saying, here are the options that the task force considered. Are there others that we should we take into consideration? And then you begin the process of evaluating those against criteria. So you would have your first public input in educational meeting at the end of that sort of data gathering stage, and then you would have one at the development of the concepts, and then the third step of the process would be sort of that evaluation process. What's the long-term effectiveness of the system? What are the short-term effectiveness? What's the impact on the neighborhood? How implementable is it? The ability to construct and operate the system, the reliability of the technology, the ability to monitor the effectiveness of the system, the availability of services and materials to support it. And then we'll get into the evaluation of the cost, the short-term, long-term, including the present value cost of those, and where are the funding opportunities. And one of the critical balancing criteria is community acceptance. And you would then have the community public meeting in comment period early in 2024. And then we would develop recommendations for presentation to the utility and the commission. So it's basically a stepped approach where we would, again, develop that background, look at and evaluate all options. And again, the do-nothing option is one of those that's always on the table. And the do-nothing option is actually not doing nothing. It would be then what happens to the land in that case. But this is an approach that is somewhat site-specific relative to the wastewater treatment plant. It can be modified for other discussions with the city, but it sort of gives you timeframe early fall. I never think August is a good time for public input because people are wrapping up vacations. So early September, potentially, getting into the discussions November, December, and then sometime early in 2014, you could present that to the alternatives and the evaluation of that, the pros and the cons, and that to the public and look for their input. So it's just a thought process.
Guess I'll open it up. Any comments here, guys? Things you like to see, things you didn't like? Go ahead, Jay.
I really liked the outline, thought it was, well organized and complete. Maybe I'm a little out of order, but I had the question on funding. Do we know where the debt ends up? Does the debt belong to the utility? Is that because I know there's a lot of concern about the debt that the city has and as it impacts its bond rating. So I'm getting the cart way before the horse, but a question that, keeps nagging at my mind with all of the issues that have been on that, in the last year.
Eric, do you?
Yeah, I think to answer your question, it could be either. The utility could take that on. We'd have to run it through the PSC as a project to make sure it's uniform for all user rates, because it would be paid by rate revenue. Or, if feasible, the city could take a look at taking it on as well. So it could be either way.
Well, hopefully the savings in electricity would pay the service on the debt. So it'd be kind of a balance sheet.
Yeah, I think that would be the, kind of one of those things that we would look at pretty carefully once we kind of narrowed down what size and power generation and taking a look at those 15-minute intervals with the power usage, yeah.
So we're not locked into one way or the other. We can do whatever makes sense at the
Yes.
time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good, thanks.
Thanks. Anything else? Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just for clarification, would this be the members of the solar task force holding these public information meetings, or would these be delivered by the city or some combination thereof?
I feel like I would be there if we were doing these public comments, just having put it all together and just to help answer questions. Go ahead, John.
And I think one of the questions that we would need to answer is how do we want to collect input? Is it a hearing? Is it a hearing and a listening session? Is it a hearing, listening session, and a survey? What mechanism do we want to do that? Now, the more methods you use, the longer the process, but the more engagement there is. So I think that would be one of the critical issues of, do we want to survey, and is the survey of the neighborhood, of the city, and how do we go about doing that? So I think that's really a critical issue for this group to do. But I would anticipate that it would be led by this task force with participation and invitations to both the commission and the council.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I was asking just because as far as developing a presentation, the information contained, how we're going to deliver that, if that's us as a task force doing that, then I think that's something, if we're looking at an initial meeting in fall of 2023, something we need to start thinking about and working on.
Yeah, I think, looking at the background stuff, that's basically been the first couple meetings, I want to say. There's some on this list yet that haven't been answered. I guess I would reach out, if Eric could, or someone on his staff could put something together for us. Would we want to approve that before we go? I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a task force, we could review whatever it is and look to approve it.
So my initial thought when public information meetings came out were to maybe go to the community meeting in the neighborhood, or the neighborhood meeting. You guys meet end of the month, correct?
We meet the last Wednesday of the month at 6:30 at NTC. We didn't meet June, July, and we won't meet August. We will resume meeting in September. If there are any changes to the date and time of those meetings, I'll provide that information as soon as possible.
You think September would be a good meeting to shoot for this first public informational meeting? I think so. Okay. That'll give us a spot to work back to, at least. Any other comments on the plan? I really liked it. Thanks, John.
You're welcome. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 3. Discussion of possible action considering solar array locations and size of the solar array near 1801 Burke Avenue.
Yeah, this
Go
is-
ahead, Eric.
Yeah, this is really a very, really high-level view, and because there were some questions from the task force here about, what does it look like, sizes, how much space do you need, potential areas. So I put up a couple boards over here too. So that black area down the bottom, what we did was we just selected an array that would generate about 1 megawatt, and so that takes up about 6 acres, is what we would need of space. This first photo, this first map, that's the property that the city or the utility owns. It's about 90 acres, give or take. You can see where the existing water treatment facility is, and then the remainder of the property. Now, everything north of the water treatment facility is in the village of Maine. And then on these boards, over here and over here, I did a little cutout, so you can kind of see where that, 6 acres would fit in different areas. And you see the different pockets of areas that we've looked at and investigated, so we kind of broke those out in the size in those areas too. So like if we looked at moving to the north, putting up different arrays in different locations, right, and tying them together. We did look at the buildings that are there right now. Each building is about a half an acre of roof space. We'd be able to use, looks like utilization would be about half of that on each building, so about 0.4 to 0.5 acres for roof space would be available. And then utilizing about a 1 megawatt array is about $2.2 to $2.5 million constructed in its entirety. If we move to different locations where we have to do additional site work, we have to put in access roads, things like that, the additional costs would be anywhere from probably about $300,000 to $800,000. And so it can get significant pretty quickly. If we move to the north, we'd have to put in access roads. We'd have to do further investigation on the soils, but a lot of it would have to come out. And then we'd have to replace it with some adequate soil. So there'd be additional cost to that as well. I don't know if the task force had any, do you have any questions, other thoughts about, like what we're looking at with this entire kind of like 90 acres that, the city currently owns?
So I'm not quite understanding where we are in the map. So
Okay.
the buildings there is the current treatment plant,
Yeah, that's correct.
and then is the proposed, or the old proposal for the raise, that's that spot to the right, okay.
This is about almost an 8 acre parcel. This shows about 6 acres. So that gives us about 1 megawatt. And that can go up, that can go down,
Okay.
for wherever you're at. But just for a concept and the space needed for for a 1 megawatt system.
And then the area to the north has lots of different, do those figures represent different activities that happened on those sites in the past, or what?
Right, so these areas up here, kind of to the northeast, right? This is where we've dug a lot of test pits. That's where these triangles are, so that's where we found buried debris, construction debris. That's going to likely have to be over excavated, and then leveled out or backfilled, and then foundations put in. These other areas, like here, you can see fill areas, you can see steep slopes. This is a stormwater pond here. And these are other areas where we're stockpiling, piles of material for use. So
And what's the 15.5 acre parcel?
that's water.
Oh,
This is part of the old quarry. That's
probably
filled
not
with
ideal
water.
then for it.
Right.
But-
Now, they do float solar panels. We
Yeah.
haven't looked into that either, what that would be up
On
here.
skis or
So, yeah.
So if you go, if you go into the town of Maine, then, is that where you're talking about additional expense for that additional 300 to 800,000?
Right. Yeah, that's where we're seeing that we're going to have to do additional work, site work, in order to make that work, to make these facilities work. I think the other challenge that we have moving to the north is the village has not been receptive for us, so we would have to go to their zoning, and they would have to approve what we're doing. And they have not been receptive, to the city of Wausau. So I'm not overly confident that, from a zoning perspective, that we'd be allowed to do anything that we wanted, so.
Okay. Thanks, I understand better now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I should have orientated everybody. Sorry about that. We talked, there were some questions too about the property. And, before the city purchased it, like, what was it? What did it look like? What, were there ideas for it? And so it was platted at one time for streets, for general housing, alleys, and broken up in lots. And so when that property was being ready to be sold, these areas for proposed roads were vacated by the city. And so then it just became a blank slate. Prior to this happening, there's also a plat that was done that includes this property as well as the 80 acres to the north. And that's all residential as well. I have a copy of that map down here too, but yeah, and I think, so this right here, right on this map shows about 9 properties. On the plat that was done down here, it shows a few more than that, maybe 10, 11 different properties. Because it is zoned residential. And so that would be a potential use for the property if nothing else went there. And yeah, this is
Is this the one you were talking about?
yeah, I just kind of blew up the section that where Bugby Avenue's down here on the south. So, and you can see the property now, obviously, where the water treatment plant is. Those would not be there. But this was done, I think, in '09, I believe. And just based on the 6 acres, then, Clark Dietz went ahead and they just prepared on the aerial photo a couple different areas where we looked on the maps, and then came up with some graphs, if you want to go. Yeah, down. You can see there's about 7 months of the year is really where you're, generating a significant amount of power.
I'll just make a comment.
Yep.
We're kind of combining agenda item
Oh,
three
yeah,
and 4
sorry.
here.
I
3 and
kept
4 here
going.
together.
Yeah, so,
We can do that, and we can discuss both of them afterwards.
no, we can stop
okay.
and maybe discuss one at a time, Chad.
Okay. Just, so I guess my question, we brought up the town of Maine. They weren't very open to us. I guess what would be the process, or would we annex that? Would they keep that property or?
Yeah, they would have to detach it from the village, and they haven't been willing to detach any property. So, so the property would remain in the village. If we wanted to use that property for anything other than what it's being used for now, we'd have to go and ask the village board for approval of that, whether that's a conditional use or whether that's a rezone of that property, so that we could do this. We asked, when we're moving a building from the current the old water treatment facility up here, and we wanted to put it to the north because operationally that would have been best, and they just flat out denied it. So, so we're going to put it on city-owned property or within the city limits, but I think we would run into the same thing with the current village board, that we've run into with other requests that we've had. Yep. A lot of resistance.
So with discussion about this specific location, I mean, we've talked a lot about berms and trees and stuff like that, and I see that we did get a letter, which I'm hoping everyone received, which we read. That black square looks like it's to the south, and in some of those trees, I guess I've also heard some of those trees may be sick, or do we got any insight there? I mean, even if we don't do anything?
Yeah, I mean, the forester went out and took a look at them. They don't see an immediate need to take anything down, but like those red pines and stuff, they're getting, at some point, the end of their life and stuff. But he didn't see anything significant, and he felt like all of the, that's an immediate concern. And then he also didn't feel that any trees would need to be removed to take care of all the underbrush and the buckthorn, all of the invasive species and stuff either.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Jay.
With the piece that's shaded out there, how large is the size of the tree strip that would be left there? Do you know?
It looks like we're taking about a third of it, maybe half of it,
Yeah.
the depth of it. So I don't know really how deep it is now, but, this is just really a bit of a concept view
Okay.
of what 6 acres looks like on that property, as well as to kind of compare it to the other areas we think that to the north that may be feasible. Like if we took a 2-acre piece, a 4-acre piece of, to try to piece together to get to that 6 acres. Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
I think, and I don't know if this is jumping too far ahead, but on page 2 of 3, it looks like there's another drawing that shows what the panels, where they would be.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that next
Okay,
item. Yeah.
just speaking
Yep.
on behalf of the neighborhood a little bit, and the trees, I know that these are early concept drawings, but just making sure that, as we're thinking about that, maintaining as many of those trees as possible, even if that means shrinking the solar array a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really something that, the task force would have to take a look at. And I think part of it too is, trying to understand what property is available at this point and what's feasible, but then based on what you're seeing, so that, as John said with the communication plan, kind of moving into really what would be feasible on the different properties, so.
Yeah, I mean, after reading the plan, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves even on our own plan with these two
Yeah.
items, but I think it's good to gather some information from them. Anyone else? We can talk about the next two? Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, discussion on capital costs and meeting the task force goals of return on investment and potential funding sources. So the next slide's down.
Yeah, so You can see just, so Sunvest just threw some general information together for us on a 1 megawatt facility and what that would generate and how it looks throughout the year, right? So it looks like maybe 7.5 months, we're generating significant power. But we are generating power 12 months a year. So, the return on investment, it is really an average that they gave us, and it's anywhere from 8 to 15 years, and that's based on, if you're capitalizing the entire project. So, if there's funding available to help offset those capital costs, that can. And then also, if we work in an area where those capital costs are higher, due to some of the challenges that we've talked about with the soils and access, just additional site work, obviously that ROI goes up probably towards that top end, So, and I think the concepts were laid out too, kind of just showing on the aerial photos what they would look like, and how they would take up that space. So, some of these numbers I can't really talk to in detail, so, yeah.
Are any of these ROI calculations including the infrastructure credits that we might be able to get?
No.
Okay.
No, we're just, because we're not sure what we would get or what that would look like, that would be something that we would have to try to calculate in at a later date when we start looking at specifics.
Right.
So we're just basing it on a full borrow. Yeah.
Okay. As a baseline, it's 30%, so theoretically, the ROI would come down 30%.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're not 100% sure because we're not sure what credits will be out there for every given year, or?
Yeah,
I guess, can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so what we're reading in the Inflation Reduction Act is that we are, by legislation now, able to take, availability of those tax credits. But there's a formula and there's a basis for how they're doing that. And if we're borrowing over a certain amount of years, that may be reduced. If we fund that project up front and full, then we might get that full 30%. But to me, that's still a little bit unclear, and we're still kind of working that out. So it's up to 30%, but could be reduced.
It could be reduced. There's also some incentives for buying in the U.S. domestic production product. There's some incentives depending on kind of how you hire labor to deal with the
Okay.
project. There's some pre-clearance things that have to be done, and then a
Okay.
filing requirement in order to get the 30% or whatever your credit amount is.
Okay,
So,
Okay.
yeah, I've looked at those hoops. That's
okay,
kind of what I do.
okay, all right, it's good to know, it's great.
Have the rules have not all been finalized relative to the distribution of the funds, is my understanding. Is that correct?
That is correct. They're starting to put out some TEP regs that we're starting to be able to have access to. All the TEP regs aren't completed yet either. I'm talking IRS regs that are what are going to interpret that law for us.
Right.
But based on similar type projects and what's in the proposals, we're starting to see things in the professional literature and within the profession on how that credit is likely to play out. And that's what I've been following in what I do.
And I know we're specifically talking about, this area, but, as we're doing projects like with the new street maintenance facility, we're looking at solar there. Based on what happens here, timing seems to, so the project may grow in different areas of the city, depending on timing of the projects and how that plays out as well, so.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So the return on investment is really dependent upon a number of factors, including, present valuing the cost and what your interest rates are if you're going to borrow. And so I think we've got a number of options that we'll need to look at. I think the critical issue here is sort of, going back to our goals, is there a desired payback period of 6 to 10 years as sort of the outlier, or what does the task force recommend, what does the city want, what does the community want in terms of return on investment as a realistic benchmark as we're trying to evaluate the project going forward. So I don't know if we're in a position to finalize that discussion, but it might be interesting to see what the ranges of returns on investment are relative to similar projects for a comparative purpose for evaluation. If you're going to evaluate the cost, you have to have a benchmark in which to compare it to.
I think after the last meeting, we all kind of agreed 10. And it maybe that's a benchmark every meeting we just bring up, like, does 10 still sound good? I mean, and 10-year return on investment. And I mean, from what I'm hearing, I wouldn't change my opinion yet. I guess it's up to the task force, though.
And I think what we were hearing is if 8 to 15 is kind of the norms in the industry, it's kind of what professionals are telling us is a kind of expected ROI, that 10's right in the middle of that. It's reasonable, and that the credits, if we factor in credits, that's likely to come down. So, without having credits factored in, if we like 10, we're in the range, this 8 to 15 range is kind of all reasonable, and it could only get better with the credits. So
Okay.
I
Yep.
like the 10 years.
Okay. Yeah, you weren't at the last meeting, but yeah, thank you for agreeing with all of us.
I watched the meeting online,
Yep.
so I formed opinions.
Yeah, yep. But that might be just something good to bring up every meeting as we learn more and more. Jay, go ahead.
As I thought a little bit more about that 10, that's a good benchmark. It doesn't really give much, or it doesn't give any input really on sizing. What's our intention? Do we want to maximize the power that can be produced for the plant, or do we just want to do something that's easy? And maybe that's just as we evaluate the different options, we'll go through that. I'm always interested in, can a water utility, a drinking water utility, be run during the daytime? So, for example, if we had a regional power outage, could we run it while the sun shines? Would it make sense to try to size the plant to do something like that?
Sure. I don't think we'd be able to run all of the facilities in there, especially, like with the larger motors during peak demands and stuff, so the generators would have to come on. I think one of the thing is when we're generating power, like during the day, it's when it's trying to optimize when we are using power. So like during the day when we're generating power, we'll need to optimize the plant to fill the towers, right, during the day versus doing it at night. Fill the distribution system, booster station, make sure all of those things are running during the time when we're actually generating power, and try to minimize power usage when we're not generating power. I think you bring up a good point as far as, we talk about the size of the array, but, one good discussion point might be to talk about, do we want to size an array that we want to minimize the amount of power going back to the grid, just because it doesn't pay back? Or do we want to make sure that we're able to run as much as we can with, a certain percentage going back to the grid we're not too worried about, and then, so those might be some thoughts as well from the task force that might be helpful.
Yeah, and so maybe that's something we look at, kind of both ends of that as we look at options. I guess my preference would be to provide as much electricity as we could to the plant.
Okay.
But, the task force will have to come up with a position on that.
I mean, I think it's agendized well enough. Do we want, we could talk about it right now, I think. I agree with you too. I guess I would lean towards, as much electricity as to run the plant, and then selling back what we can would be where I would want to go. Any other comments there? Go ahead, John.
Do we know, Eric, do we know what our peak load demand is and what our peak capacity with just say we did the 6 acre would generate and how those overlap? I think it's probably early in the process.
Yeah,
To
we
evaluate
really,
those.
yeah, we really don't know, John.
But are we tracking our peak demand in terms of kilowatts per hour by hour?
Yeah, for 15-minute integrals, actually.
So we would have a good idea
Yeah.
of what the demand would be on
Right.
on a time-sensitive basis.
Yep. And that's what we'd look at for optimization of the plant too. We'd look at that and try to understand, like right now, how do we alter our controls at this point, to change out some, where those demands are as well. So,
Maybe I don't need to know this, but I kind of feel like I want to know more about how the plant runs.
okay.
So maybe we could have a presentation on that or a field trip or, I don't know.
Field trip's great,
yeah.
anytime. Yeah, we'll take you through it and, yeah, so you get a visual of everything from.
Feels like we might make better decisions if we
Sure.
know more about what's there.
Yep.
I think we can arrange something there. Any other comments on capital costs, return on investment, potential funding? Okay. We'll move on.
I do have
Yeah, go
a
ahead. John.
question directed to Susan. What, many times they deliver the preliminary rules and then they've got the final rules. What is your expectation of final rules relative to the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of the distribution of the credits to local governments?
I'm kind of out of my depth on this. In prior years, I would have told you that temporary regs generally are pretty close to final regs, and what you hear during the rulemaking process is what shows up in those temporary regs and final regs. But the last 5 years, you see these omnibus bills that go through that are very bare bones, and implementation can look very different. So it's been a lot harder in my industry for us to predict how those regs are going to turn out until they're actually issued. Again, that's hard to know. It has to go soon because the funds are allocated and people are going to start filing for pre-clearances. And that process has been started. And that pre-clearance process is to allocate funds to different projects as they go.
Jack, would it be possible for us to develop sort of that, from a framing perspective and understanding timing, sort of a schedule and milestones that would need to be achieved in order to qualify for that 30% credit? If we need pre-clearance, what are the steps that would need to be done? I'd hate to have us move forward with a concept that's predicated upon funding only to find out that we're outside the parameters of the program. So I think it would be helpful if somehow someone could put together sort of the steps in the length of time or the duration between each of the steps that would be required so that we would have a better idea of, we need to make a decision by X date.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really good idea, but I'm not sure what your thoughts are for how that would be implemented. The people that are working in the industry are going to have the best knowledge on that, the hoops and everything that you jump through, not necessarily somebody like me who's reading after the fact as part of a public practice.
We can look into that and try to kind of outline what we think that we need to do, and then also try to predict what the timelines would be for that. I think that would be a good idea.
Okay, let's just making some notes. Any more comments there? And we'll move on to agenda item number 5, discussion on the draft frequently asked questions. So, Eric, I don't know if you want to kick this off?
Yeah, so, what we're trying to do, we've started putting together a list of questions, that kind of been asked and answered. And so not only are we trying to answer the questions, but also where we're getting the information to answer those questions. And I think this is really going to be a living document, over the course of this process. So as we get more questions in general, I think this will be a good thing to put out to the public in general and with our communications plan. And I think that we just keep it updated. And so if any of the members here hear questions from the public or have questions of your own, I think it would be good to send those to us, and we could keep this updated. We could do the research for you, get the answers for you, and yeah, and I think just kind of keep a running list of all of these. Yeah.
It does seem real similar to what John kind of laid out in the background gathering information, or part of
Right.
it, which
Yeah.
made me feel better. So I guess we could just read through the questions that we have on there right now. Go ahead, John.
One of the things that's missing is sort of the process, what is the process that we're, the steps. And so somehow if we could factor in sort of this that we talked about earlier, that community engagement and public hearing, when will the public have an opportunity to comment? I think that's, to the neighbors, a very important piece of information we want to make available.
Yep. So I agendized after we're done talking, and we'll see if there's any more questions that we missed today. But then, yeah, I feel like when we go out for that first engagement, as per the schedule, I think that would be another great spot to get feedback. Any other comments, questions there? So it's. Go
I
ahead.
have one I'd like to get kind of added to the list
Yeah.
because it's a factor in the credits of things, is you have the question for where solar panels made, and 74% of them are Chinese. I get that. Which means 26% are not. And if we're looking for the potential to buy made in USA, buy domestic products, get the extra 10% bump in the credits, where do we stand on domestic production, and how does that factor in? I
Okay.
think there are a lot of people who'd like to know that.
Yep, we can find that
So
out.
break that out so that the U.S. is on the at least the U.S. is on the list. Yeah.
Plus, what do we predict coming down the line? Because there was a whole lot of, Build Back Better in the infrastructure credit that had to do with domestic production and enhancements. And so what are people saying about how that's going to develop in the U.S.?
I did a quick Google, and the U.S. produces 2.7%. So, yeah, so I'm sure there are plans for lots of factories, but they're just plans.
There also was something in the reading that talked about the idea of domestic, including perhaps Canada. And so I'm not sure if that'll end up being in the final regs on this, but it becomes a factor for us.
So that's part of the 30% if it's domestic versus,
The base credit is 30%. There's a 10% addition you can
okay.
get if you use domestic product. So that would bump your credit to 40% theoretically.
okay. Is that kind of protection from the Chinese just cutting their price more? I mean, that's happened in the past. We've supported solar panels, and the Chinese just undercut the price, and then you can't run the U.S. or the domestic factory.
I think it has to do with the fact that if we're going to incentivize companies to build in the U.S., we need to make sure there's a market for them.
Right.
And that's one way to do that, is ensure that there's demand when you create supply.
Right. The link on that one, I don't know, I read through it a couple times. I couldn't see where that link addressed the production percentages. It produced, or it talked about the percentage of power, or the amount of power that's produced by solar panels in each company, in each country, but not where the panels were made,
Okay.
so. As long as I
Yeah.
mention that,
Go
there's, it's the second to last one, the link there also didn't seem to address the question on the 30% tax credit.
Are there tax incentives for solar energy? That's the one you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
I think there are some more
Go ahead.
targeted, I think, sources that we might want to look at versus
Sure.
the White House summary of the entire act.
There is a big piece that's currently coming up in the IRS website addressing this.
but it's a good document.
Yeah, yeah. No, work in progress, so,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Yep.
And I'm sure links are going to break over the years and have to get new sources found out. And yeah, I'm sure this is going to be a very live document. So we also have some property, the property value question on there, the noise from the solar farm, how much electricity does the new plant use? Will there be increased traffic? How tall are the solar panels? Solar panel maintenance, snow, dirt. I guess to that point, how would you envision us handling the maintenance, cleaning them off, or for a city array?
I mean, I wouldn't think that we'd really need to clean them, you know, just from what we read and stuff, that they, you know, they're self-cleaning. We wait for the rain and the snow melt and stuff. But if we did have issues and stuff, we would plan on maintaining this in-house with the electricians we have on staff, so, yep.
And these would be tracking, a tracking array,
That's what we're proposing now, yes.
which seems like it doesn't really have much issue with snow, with the movement of the array takes care of the snow.
Yeah, it has a lot less
Yeah.
issues with snow, yep.
There's also the glare question on there, where the solar panels are made, which we talked about already, how weather resistant they are, lifespan of the solar panels, why, location of the arrays, typical ROIs, how long the construction takes, what they're made out of, can they be recycled, tax incentives, which we talked about, and then how much power can solar produce in Wisconsin. So I think that's kind of the start. And you, yeah, go ahead, Susan.
I have one more, and I don't know if it came up here one other time. Did we talk about whether this is a static array or whether it's going to have movement tracking?
Yeah, what we're proposing is to have tracking
Okay.
right now.
And
Yep.
so maybe we want to add a question or and an answer for the benefits of tracking versus a static array.
Okay.
Any other questions come to mind? Otherwise, I'm sure we'll be working on this one probably until next spring, I'm sure. That's fine. Oh, Caitlin wonders if trees or shrubs or what can go underneath the solar arrays and what the availability would be there.
Yeah, lots of landscaping can go underneath them. You know, it can be butterfly habitat, you know, bee habitat. They're, right, yeah, livestock can go underneath them. You know, there's lots of options that can happen.
I think that'd be a good question and answer.
Yeah.
Just thinking of, well, I'm sure this has been asked, but I'll just ask it anyway. The being right next to the river, is there issue with flooding? Is it being a possibility there? I mean, you've got the problem with the water treatment plant itself, but
Right, no, in this area, you know, we're well above
Okay.
flood elevations.
yeah,
so,
I would imagine it just,
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's a good question, yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Is there an opportunity for us to ask the neighborhood what other questions they have?
So I agendized it, when we're done, whoever's in the audience, if they'd like anything added.
But I think in addition to the people that are here, it's great.
Yep.
But there are also other concerns with people that can't make it. So do we have a mechanism that they could direct questions to a place where we could have a clearinghouse to capture those questions?
Go ahead, Paul.
I don't have a clearinghouse option, but when we meet again in September, I know that we're potentially looking at providing information then, but we generally send out a post through email and then on the Nextdoor app just a week or two ahead of time, so we could certainly just say, hey, this is what's happening, attend, be prepared with questions. You know, that would be one mechanism to gather feedback. It wouldn't be a survey per se, but it'd be a start.
Go ahead, John.
Would there be a way for us to use that post now to generate questions that people might have so that we would have an opportunity to collect those questions and begin to answer them? Because some of them may not be answerable at that meeting, and I think it would be beneficial to have that available.
Sure, I think that's an option. And potentially, could we look at having a link on the city website? You know, a link solar in Wausau where people could post questions, or to that effect, we could post information as well.
Yeah, I can take a look at getting something set up, Paul.
And I'll just volunteer, my email is out there on the city website, so I mean, you're always welcome to email me any questions you might have that we can get answered or get on the list. But I also think that meeting in September, we'll probably get a lot of questions and this document will change, and I think that'll be, you know, maybe we do a survey at the end of that where people who don't feel comfortable talking about it, because I know I'm one of those people, but feel better writing it out and asking the question, maybe just a little half sheet of paper or something with any questions that you still may have, I think would be a good idea. Good. I guess with that, I'll open it up to anyone from the community that might want a question added, has a question that needs to be added.
My name is Pete Roth. I think all of you received my letter. I guess my question at this point in time, your frequently asked questions document, is this online?
It is not yet.
Okay,
but
will it be?
I believe that's what we were talking about, adding a link on the website
Okay.
where we'll be able to get to this.
And I have not looked, and I do understand the city website has been updated or changed or is all new, but is the link to you guys updated? Because it was an incorrect link. I sent you a copy of what I saw. It appears that Marathon County handles the IT for the city. I don't know, because when I went to, you know, say, hey, this is going the wrong spot, Marathon County, something popped up, but, and again, it may have been updated. But the link to the solar array task force did not go to you guys. That was in my letter to you, copies. So anyways, but frequently asked questions, I would like to see that, you know, a link to that. My big concern, and I think the concern of the neighborhood, I mean, and as I said in my letter and, you know, previous meetings, you know, I don't think there's any question on educating the community about the advantages of solar. I think the question really is the direct neighborhood, the placement of these panels. I'm going to disagree with Eric as far as other areas, having lived out there for a very long time, having seen what's been dumped out there over, basically 40 years I've lived in the area. There's a lot of debris, a lot of junk. I understand there is cost to remove that, fill whatever it is. Maybe there's some bodies in there, who knows? Maybe that's where Jimmy Hoffa is. But I really strongly believe that you should explore, because you're going to have costs at this proposed array site. You're going to have costs to dig up the junk that is there, and there is junk there beyond the trees. Explore going to the north. I don't know that that pond is 15 acres. Maybe it is. It doesn't seem to be that big from the last time I walked back there, but I think there's a lot of area to the north. And with regard to the town of Maine, while they may have in the past, and maybe in the very recent past, been hard to work with, I would certainly make the effort to approach them, if you need, rezoning or whatever. That's dead land, that's dead area north of the facility. So anyways, again, my push is to have you guys really evaluate and investigate. Nobody here, I think, is against solar,
Okay.
but I think we really need to look hard at what are the costs to dig at this proposed site for whatever footings, debris removal versus, you said 800,000, I don't know how accurate that is. So that's it. Thank you.
Yep, and I think we'll add it as, we'll get those links working for the solar array through the website. And then that could be another spot to reach out with questions
Okay. Thank you.
to add to the list.
Thank you.
Yep,
I have
thank
to
you.
run to another meeting.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else, guys? Yeah, come on up.
Hi, I'm Pete Sells. Probably know me, I live on Tierney Road. I just have two questions. The area to the north, everyone's talking about the cost of excavating and digging, and how deep do we really need to go? What would stop you from building up another 4 feet or 8 feet and a slab of some sort? How do these things, what do they weigh? What kind of foundation is really needed for this?
Sure. We could add that to the FAQ, definitely.
And the other question is the town of Maine issue again. They haven't played in the same sandbox effectively. There's disagreement, however we got to this point. But if you don't consider using it, that's also dead land, and what is the future use of that? Why is that less useful than the land off of Tierney Road? I think you need to reapproach Maine and get some definitive answers on that situation instead of just speculating about it.
Sure.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
You guys good? Okay, any other comments? No? All right, John, go ahead.
Just toward that end, I think if we could capture some of the maps that we put out today and put those in the, link those or put those in the FAQs, what areas under consideration, and just provide as much information as possible.
Yeah, I think it would help them too, yeah. Yeah. Yep, come. Sorry, come to the mic, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Marion Sells, and I live right across the street from the east side of the water treatment facility. Now I forgot what I was going to say. Excuse me, I lost my thought.
That's all right. We'll be we'll be around. We'll be around after the meeting too if it comes back to you. Yeah.
Just quick, Joe Hoff, I live at the corner of Bugby and Tierney, the only house that does that. But is it my understanding that the town of Maine land is right at the north of the plant? And it's right there, like where the road is, and then goes north? Where is they're right there, okay? I mean, is the road even part of the town of Maine? The road going,
It appears like that little bump is
Yeah,
in the
little-
town of Maine,
that's awfully close, okay.
village of Maine. Sorry.
I was just trying to get a handle, because all those little squiggles and circles up there are contingent upon us getting along with the town of Maine, right?
Correct.
All right.
When these presentations are made to the public, you know, you have the picture and it just shows where the plant is, but if you expand that out, there's homes along Tierney Road and Bugby Avenue, and it needs to be pointed out that one of the objections is that the proposed site is right in the middle of a neighborhood. So, you know, if you just present that, it looks pretty good, but make sure you give the full view that there are homes right there.
Sure. I'm sure we can do that. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action establishing agenda items for the next meeting. And I'm going to start with our schedule we just talked about today. And I believe the background is we've been talking about for quite a while. I think more information on the funding would be really helpful. What did I have there too? Oh, and steps required to meet those funding dates, Eric, if we can get that on there. Yeah, and a tour, we'll probably schedule that when we schedule the next meeting, I think. But also I see maybe a layout of the current costs, if we could do a graph and talk about that.
Rough cost.
Current utility use, sorry, that way. And yes, and then a rough cost. And the savings realized by the utility. Go ahead, John.
Can that facility tour include a walking tour of that other parcel, the other parcels? Give us a better feel of the lay of the land, if you will?
Okay, so any other discussion points or things that come to people's mind for next time? And then I guess dates. I guess let's start with the walking tour. Can you bring a calendar up for me? August, yeah, probably into August. So assuming it would be in the afternoon, we want to shoot for 5 o'clock, seems to work with everyone here. And not Wednesday, I was told. But the 17th we could probably do. Would that work for people?
I have county board.
county board? Okay.
Night.
The week of the 14th, you're out of town? How about, the 8th, that Tuesday?
We have council.
Yeah, but if we did it at 5, I could be back for council. The 8th at 5 o'clock? Is that all right with you, Eric, right before?
I know I'm flying in that day, so I don't think I get in till like 10 o'clock.
At night?
I think so. You know, we don't have great flights here.
What about the 9th? I know it's Wednesday.
9th is good for me.
I am with your other half
Okay.
for the Human Resources Finance Property Committee.
If we pushed it to 6 like we did last time, would that?
I can make that work.
Or the 22nd? Well, the 22nd, you might have county board on the 22nd.
I do. You had a committee meeting. So that's a tight day.
Okay.
I'll make the 9th work
The 9th, okay.
at 6.
At 6? The 9th at 6?
Are we the tour?
Yeah. Tour? I guess ahead of, no, that, we're setting the tour date now. If that works. And then I guess, is it just for us? Can we open this up to public? I mean, how many people can we have on it? Well, okay, whoever would like to come. Okay, so the 9th at 6, we'll do the tour. And then the meeting, I'd like to do it before the September. And do we think we need 2 meetings before that September meeting? Will we be able to get the FAQ all ironed out in one meeting? And these last few current utility needs questions answered and because that meeting is what day, Paul? September 27th? At 6:30?
If anything changes, I'll try to find out before our August meeting for sure.
What if we did, no, September's fine.
You want me to work this week?
Yeah, if we did like early September for the next meeting?
This is Labor Day.
Yeah. Okay, so Labor Day is the 4th. Want to shoot for the 7th, or people got that week off?
Do the 6th, concert in the square.
Oh, and concerts on the square are done on the 6th.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not going to be around that week.
Okay. And 13th? September 13th? At 5 again?
I have human resource, that second Tuesday of every month, I've got a committee meeting at 3.
What about Wednesday?
Or excuse me, second Wednesday of every month.
Okay.
Wednesday and Thursday, and I could do it later, but 5 is too,
6?
yeah.
We do 6 o'clock again? Okay. And I guess a goal from that meeting would be, I think, to focus on the background step of this communication plan and timeline and prepare for the September community meeting. Go ahead.
And this is a meeting in September, we're not setting one in August?
Do we want to set one in August? I mean, I guess that's up to us. We can. I know we've been doing monthly. Go ahead, John.
Could we agendize it so that at the end of the tour, that we could capture any thoughts and questions that we have as a result of the tour to identify those so we don't lose that month? There's a room out there. I know it's difficult for public access, Eric, to do it, but if the purpose was exclusively to identify potential questions to be answered in the FAQ, we could probably do that there. I think we want to make sure that we've got the public engagement, but I think that we're developing we're not really having a policy discussion, we're identifying questions.
Okay, so I agendize after the meeting, maybe have a question gathering session after the tour, sorry. Does that work?
Yeah,
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Any other items
So if we do that, we probably don't need an additional meeting then.
in August? Yeah, I think we'll capture any thoughts there. And then, like I said, use the September 1 as get everything ready for the community meeting the following, in the week and a half or whatever, 2 weeks out that it would be. And then go from there. And, yeah, I think that'd be good. All right. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll move on to adjournment. Do I got a motion to adjourn? Motion by John. Seconded by Paul. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we stand adjourned.